Welcome to the TechLink Health Podcast, an on-demand source for the top trending healthcare topics and insights. Delivered by key opinion and emerging leaders and as featured on the TechLink Health app. The healthcare industry is rapidly evolving, so our goal is to connect listeners to the most relevant insights, ranging from digital health to financial well-being to interesting side gigs. For more details, visit www.techlink.health.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the TechLink Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Sarah Saman, and my guest today is Dr. Keith Matheny. Often on the podcast, we discuss themes related to the pillars of health such as sleep, exercise, diet, and stress management, along with the technologies, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are helping to create the future of health and wellness. When thinking about these core pillars, it becomes important to examine the clinical specialties that influence the desired health outcomes. On the same note, it's equally as important to highlight the innovators and entrepreneurs that are helping to create a healthier future for people, peers, and organizations. Today's episode focuses on otorhinolaryngology, or what many refer to as ENT. Ear, nose, and throat specialists, and how the science will continue to help evolve the healthcare industry and the emerging technologies that will pave the way to the future. The topic is timely as many are still in the process of moving beyond the global pandemic and examining perspectives on the future of health and wellness. I'm really excited about this episode's guest, Dr. Keith Matheny, a medical entrepreneur and practicing physician in the specialty of otolaryngology, focused on head and neck surgery. Keith is involved in a variety of activities, including being a founder in multiple companies such as Septum Solutions, US ENT Partners, and Sleep Vigil. I know Keith as a physician in my community and have had years of collegial experience with him and can attest to his high competence and his interest in a wide range of issues related to health and wellness. Keith also works as a physician for the Dallas Cowboys. He's a fellow of the American Rhinologic Society, a committee member for the American Academy of Otolaryngology, and president of Matheny Enterprises, a company that has established dozens of patents for innovative technologies and medical devices. On the academic side, Keith completed his residency and training with my alma mater, the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. He got his MD from UT Health Houston and a BA from Baylor University. It goes without saying that Keith has a passion for entrepreneurship, innovation, and helping others to live a better and healthier life. And we look forward to getting his perspectives on the podcast. So without further delay, we're excited to welcome Dr. Keith Matheny to the podcast. Keith, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm glad to be here.
So to start and to give our listeners some background, can you take a moment to introduce yourself in a bit more detail and tell us about your journey in the otolaryngology space?
Absolutely. I love ENT, so I'm not even going to say the big long word anymore. Let's just agree to say ENT. I love ENT as a specialty. It's a vibrant specialty, really made up of 7 different subspecialties, just related by anatomy. What I do, which is mostly sinus work, so intranasal work, as it affects sinus and allergies, yes, and also as it affects sleep disorders. That's very different than ear surgery. It's very different than head and neck cancer surgery or facial plastic surgery or pediatric ear, nose, and throat, all of which are encompassed within our specialty, but just related by anatomy. So I've been in my current practice. I'm in a community practice. As you mentioned, Sarah, we practiced for many years together in the same community in North Dallas. I've been with this practice over 20 years since finishing my training at Vanderbilt, but this is where I grew up. And this is a wonderful place to practice. We have excellent patients, really, very well-educated people who partner with us in their care. In ENT, ear, nose, and throat, cares for a variety of disease states, mostly dealing with quality of life. Things like allergies and chronic sinus infections and hearing loss. and sleep apnea, snoring. I love what I do from that standpoint. It's not so much life and death, which is more of what you did as a cardiologist, but it's quality of life, and it's improving quality of life. And currently, I have 3 partners, and then we have 3 mid-level providers. We have another chief resident at the medical school here in Dallas, UT Southwestern, joining us. So we have in the ENT space what's considered a large practice, having 5 physicians and 3 mid-level providers. And so that's my day job, but as you alluded to, Sarah, I wear many other hats and have started many other ventures.
It's been fascinating to follow your journey over the last several years and to see how much of an influence you're having on the ENT sphere in general and on people's quality of life, not just in our community, but across the country. So, hearing about your journey into clinical medicine, I'm even more interested to learn about connecting the dots to your many entrepreneurial ventures. So, let's dig a little deeper into those areas. We've often covered topics such as sleep and respiratory health on TechLink Health. So, tell us more about Septum Solutions, US ENT Partners, and Sleep Vigil, and how those endeavors are helping consumers, fellow physicians, and organizations, not just in our community, but across the country.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like those 3 companies are 3 of my kids, and so I'm always happy to tell the true story behind those companies. I think the best place to start is a description of how I started in this community practice. When I finished at Vanderbilt, I was in my early to mid-30s, like most of us that go straight through education-wise. We do school twice, right? We go kindergarten through 12th grade, and then we do 4 years of college and 4 years of med school and 5 or 6 years of additional training before we really even have our first day on the job. I don't know that others in other fields really appreciate how long the path is, but as long as that path is, I don't know about you, Sarah, but I did not have even 3 semester hours of Business 101. And yet, upon graduation, we're unleashed on these multi-million-dollar businesses, and as one might expect, they're not run very well. Typically, medical practice, and this isn't just in ENT, this is in all specialties, is run by folks also with healthcare training, such as medical assistants or perhaps nurses, that have just been around the block several times, and so they're somewhat familiar with how to interface with insurance companies, how to do this, how to do that, more so than the doctors are maybe, but that doesn't mean things are run well. And so my practice when we joined it was no different. I joined 2 wonderful physicians, one of which has retired now, the founding partner. His name is William Cobb. You probably knew him. And then I still practice with the other physician, who's a wonderful physician. And my first week of practice, I had 50 new patients just from their overflow, so just from answering the phone. During COVID, even post-COVID, there were times I would kill for that busyness 20 plus years later. So they were obviously doing something right from a business standpoint. Namely, they were just being excellent doctors and taking great care of patients. But really, anywhere else we looked, inside the practice in our immediate surroundings, was an opportunity for improvement. You practice at the same hospital, so we were by a HCA facility that has since reinvented itself and is really thriving, but at that time was really suffering. Inside the office, the practice was a mixture of 3 practices that had merged and one physician retired. And so those 3 groups of staff members really didn't get along. That showed forth in poor customer service. This wasn't that long ago. We didn't have a website. ENT, not only does it have a variety of disease states and subspecialties, but it has a lot of ancillary businesses such as hearing aid sales or allergy shots, even doing cosmetics. And so this practice at the time had gaps in service, and we had no mid-level providers. Our billing and collection, our revenue cycle was way out. And so, again, once you just barely peeked under the hood and looked at the engine, there was a lot of room for improvement. So, again, having no training, but having a little bit of interest and admittedly having more time than my 2 busy partners, I took over business operations even before I was a full partner. And over the subsequent 5 or 6 years, I made a lot of mistakes and learned from those, made some good guesses, found some really good administrative help, to be honest. And we transformed the business side of the practice into one I like to describe it as being much busier than we already were because of our infrastructure. We had figured out how to use mid-level providers optimally. We had a robust online presence. We had moved out of that old clinic, which when I joined was already 30 years old. This was over 20 years ago, and it looked its age. We had moved into 3 modern offices in this geographic area. We're taking advantage of new referral patterns. We'd gone paperless. We had turned those departments like our hearing aid department, our allergy department into thriving sub-businesses that were profitable for the practice. It got involved in sleep, gotten involved in cosmetics, really worked on every angle of the practice. And so other practices around Dallas-Fort Worth took notice, and they really would ask us informally at first, hey, can you help us find a physician assistant and implement that? Or can you help us fix our hearing aid department? Can you help us start an allergy division? What have you. And so that morphed into a consulting company, which really is the underpinnings of US ENT today. This is 15 years ago. And that's still near and dear to my heart, namely helping my colleagues identify opportunities for improvement in their business and to run better business. And the larger goal for me is to help my colleagues run better businesses, which gives them a lot more choice, autonomy, and freedom. In other words, there's a move in many specialties for outside investment. And while I personally think that can be magnificent and take a practice to another level, many times my colleagues, at least in the ENT space, are selling their practice under duress. It's because they're having a hard time financially staying afloat. It's a whole series of podcasts about how different practicing medicine today is versus when we graduated from Vanderbilt. I still love it, but it's not a lot of fun. A lot of the fun has been taken out of it, a lot of our autonomy and freedom. So very briefly then, the local consulting effort grew into some desire to have a national footprint, and deciding what that looked like really required us looking at what was going on in the ENT space 10, 12 years ago. There was a huge shift in the site of service. Many ENT procedures, most notably in the sinus arena, moved out of the hospital and out of ambulatory surgery centers into the office setting. And while that is great from most angles, from the patient, from the third-party payer, from the physician standpoint, the one unintentional consequence was that it made practicing ENT very expensive. All of a sudden, we had hundreds of thousands of dollars in supply costs that we didn't have 5 years before because the supplies were purchased by the facility. And oh, by the way, reimbursement is set up even still today in most cases. The facility fees are designed to cover those costs, but physicians cannot receive facility fees in most cases. And so that's when we decided that the best way to help businesses on a national scale was to bring some cohesive pricing, inventory management, purchasing to the specialty. And so that's what USENT is today. It's a formal group purchasing organization, a GPO, bringing significant double-digit, well into the 20% usually savings across an ENT clinic. So in the hearing space, in the sinus space, in the allergy space, in the sleep space, in capital equipment, technology. And so that further allows my colleagues then, and myself, to run better business because our costs are down. And as I joke with my team, that company, though, is still a consulting company. So cost savings are really day one. But from day two, my account managers, my team members were looking at these practices critically on areas that they can streamline the business, but also looking for new revenue opportunities. Again, all aimed at improving the health of the business. So these physicians want to improve the health of their patients. I want to improve the health of the physician in the practice so that they can continue to take care of patients. So that's USENT. That's probably a good place to pause, and we'll talk about my other 2 children here shortly.
So you describe substantial cost savings with the work that you do, and I appreciate your frankness and the fact that you're willing to share this insight. We're highly trained professionals as physicians, but most of us do stumble into the business of medicine. And I agree with you. I never in any of my training had any business insights or
No,
none of the
maybe
people
a
that
grand rounds one time. That's 1 hour in 26 years of education.
exactly. And most of the people that were training us were not people that were involved in business,
That's a good point. They're employees of an academic center. And so they don't, even if they wanted to, they don't function in a practice setting like that. So it's hard for them to teach us.
Exactly. And that can be much to our detriment, especially in the current environment. And most of us, after we go through a training program, don't go into academics. We are out in the world. And as you mentioned, we want and we expect choice, freedom, and independence, as you say. And yet, many physicians, especially now, are left with very little choice, freedom, or independence.
They're employees, right? And there's a lot of restriction, at least the perception is a lot of restriction on their choice in how they care for their patients. And that's not why my older daughter is going into medical school, and she has all the altruism and the enthusiasm and excitement that you and I did too. And you never think that you're not going to be able to choose how to care for your patients. But in many cases, there are those kind of considerations from others that limit our choices. I'm working very hard, and my colleagues in USENT, to maintain what we have and improve that.
That's fantastic. And we definitely need people like you to stay that course and help pull us out of the situation that we found ourselves in. I believe and hope that when your daughter finishes her training, it'll be a better situation, a different world.
Yeah, I tend to be optimistic that it will be too. I think we probably have touched bottom, and there's so much awareness about these issues now that I think we now have a chance to improve that.
It's quite apparent that you've had a very unique professional journey. And I'm interested to know what are some of the lessons that you've learned or practical advice that you have for peers or for the next generation of medical entrepreneurs and physicians. And along those lines, on this podcast, we often discuss the process of gaining regulatory approval versus taking a wellness device approach. So, talk to that also and about the process that you followed as a physician looking to commercialize an idea which can ultimately help a patient and help other physicians in similar situations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a perfect tee up to talk about the other two companies. So just like we don't get business training, we also don't go to law school anywhere along the way. So you never learn even what the acronym IP means, intellectual property, right? I was fortunate during my research rotation to work over in the Vanderbilt Cancer Center and certainly in medical school down in the amazing McGovern Medical School at the Texas Medical Center. I was able to participate in some amazing research, but that research belongs to the institution, right? So even the brilliant physicians and PhDs that were carrying out that work, at Vanderbilt, we developed a cancer drug that's been wildly successful since commercialization 25 years ago. That, as it should, the revenue from that goes to Vanderbilt. It doesn't go to my professor that was in charge of the lab. So one thing that's important, and I had no idea, but the comment you made a second ago that most of us go out into a community practice setting, that was huge for me in how my career has unfolded now with dozens of patents, 2 or 3 companies already built off those things and many more to come in the future. I have the freedom to do so with my own ideas. So backing up a little bit, just like we didn't know anything about business when we graduated, we didn't know anything about how you get a bright idea from the proverbial cocktail napkin drawing to a commercial product that's used to treat our patients. 11, 12 years ago, there was this big transition of the site of service where we were caring for our patients in our office now. And that was really spawned by a company that developed balloon catheters for angioplasty. So some very clever people came out of your space, the cardiology space, that had worked there all of the 90s and really developed balloon catheters for angioplasty and all the stents that can be delivered on them, the drug-eluting stents, the bioabsorbable stents, and all that magnificent technology. But what happened in the early 2000s is those clever people came over into the ENT space, as did a lot of investment. And we really think back to those days as a renaissance of sort. Before that, the procedures that I learned as a medical student and as a resident in many cases were not that different than sinus procedures in particular that were performed after the Civil War, the United States Civil War. So literally over 100 years with pretty minimal changes. There were some changes in instrumentation, the ability to use endoscopes, rudimentary CT navigation, and some powered instruments, but by and large, surgery was not that different until the balloon came over from cardiology into the ENT space. And then there became a plethora of other new technologies. So that's why we were able to start treating patients in the office. Before that, especially sinus surgery, but many of our surgeries were so invasive that they just could not be done safely under local anesthesia in an office setting. And I had always been interested as a resident. I never turned down a free steak dinner when I was at Vandy, when these companies would come and get our opinions on their upstream technology. I was naive then. I realized now they weren't so much interested in my opinion about their technology. They wanted to brand themselves to me because they knew as soon as we finish our residency, we actually then have some choice in the technology that we purchase and our facilities purchase. But nevertheless, I always found that I really enjoyed seeing what was coming down the pipe and giving my 2 cents. And so when that balloon company came to market around 2006, 2007, they chose strategically to come out to the community, to people like me. Most technologies, even still today, are first launched in academic centers with the professors and the folks with the international reputations that we always listen to their lectures. This company chose to come out to the guys like me that were very busy and had a lot of experience on the front lines of treating patients. And while that caused a lot of political unrest within the ENT space, and they may regret it, it was fantastic for me because all of a sudden, just 5-6 years out of my training, I was able to have a voice. I was able to participate in panels at national meetings. I was able to do speaking engagements and participate in clinical research. And so that really ignited my passion for new technology. And I discovered that I was, to borrow the phrase from the Outliers book, Malcolm Gladwell, I was an early adopter. I always loved trying new technology in my patient care and giving feedback. And so I developed some sort of reputation for someone that you want to try new things with. And so I was fortunate to do the first case of this, the first case of that, this, that, and the other. And many of those experiences led to my own ideas. And most of my path in entrepreneurship, I have been treated very ethically, very fairly, very honestly. I've had very few people, not zero, but very few people that have tried to rip ideas off and take advantage. For the most part, I've found it to be very collegial, but I was still very naive. The first ideas I had, which is the basis for septum solutions, were a bioabsorbable stent that we would use after septoplasty or rhinoplasty, so surgery where we basically straighten the nose inside and out. And what we had been using for 50 plus years before that was a very painful, uncomfortable, big hunk of plastic to splint everything in place while it healed. Basically an internal cast. And after seeing some of the drug-eluting stents that you used in cardiology and finally came over to the ENT space, I thought that would be fantastic after this type of procedure to have a bioabsorbable device that perhaps could deliver some beneficial drug therapy during recovery. And so I set about doing that. Now, this is in 2011. And naively, I thought, oh, yeah, well, I can just tell one of these big ENT companies my idea. They'll help me develop it. And in 6 months, we'll be using this clinically. Not at all. As we joke about, most overnight successes are usually years and years of 24/7 work. And that's been the case with USENT, and that's been the case with Septum Solutions. In actuality, what happened is when I spouted off my ideas, these very responsible medical device industry executives told me to shut up. And they told me to contact an IP attorney to file some patents. And so my advice and I'm fortunate to now be in the position of guiding so many people through this process. is just do a search. When you have an idea, do a Google patent search or look at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO website. Both of them are very easy to search through and see what patents have been issued, what's out there. And I advise to do that in conjunction with an attorney because they usually, a clever IP attorney can usually find a novel angle that you can then protect. And so once you file the patent, it may take years and years. Some of my patents that I initially filed in 2011, 2012 still haven't issued, but dozens and dozens have. The filing is an important step, though. It gives you some protection within that domain to then start talking about the business side of developing it. And so that's when I went back to the large companies and talked about these ideas. So my next area of naivete was how it all works. So large companies, and you can fill in the blank here with the biggest medical device companies, they don't develop early stage ideas. What those companies do well is they acquire technology that has been proven in the marketplace, first of all, to be effective for patient care, but also that physicians have adopted it widely and that they're using it, they want to use it more. And what they then do is rapidly expand patient access to that technology. In retrospect, I wasted yet another 2, 3, 4 years working with these companies, and they were very pleasant to deal with, and I was an important customer as a physician. I was often doing negotiations with them for US ENT. So I think they tread lightly and didn't want to burst my bubble. But in retrospect, I wish they would have told me sooner, because it wasn't until about 2016 that I finally partnered with the right team that could develop early stage ideas. And then I now have a commercial product in Septum Solutions. It's a wonderful device based on a material called chitosan that's hemostatic, so it stops bleeding. It has its own natural antimicrobial activity, so antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal. The device is super comfortable for patients. It's just a wonderful device. But this is about version number 16. There's just so many stops and starts when you actually finally have the right team in place. So it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. But nevertheless, here we are 11, 12 years later, and we have a commercial product, and it's a good one. Sleep Vigil is a more recent development, and so I'm now in this wonderful orbit where I've met so many people over the last 10, 15 years developing new technologies that just by networking, connecting, we find each other. And Sleep Vigil is very different again. It's a software company. It's really a platform that takes data from devices as simple as an Apple Watch in our sleep apnea patients and puts that into the physician's chart so we can make tweaks all along the way. But it's also a new potential revenue stream. And the reason that is so important, your colleagues in cardiology are doing this for hypertension, for high blood pressure. When we look at the sleep space, which is one of my real passions clinically, we're doing a lousy job caring for these patients, and it's a very severe disease. Literally, people are holding their breath for extended periods of time, and their oxygen levels are dropping to dangerously low. And many people do have cardiac events and neurologic events. And in general, about a quarter of the population is walking around with sleep apnea. 90% of people are undiagnosed, don't even know they have it. They think they have snoring, and it's a minor annoyance to their bed partner. It's not. This is a very serious disease. So we've only diagnosed maybe 10% of those people, and we're only treating about 10% of that 10%. More than 90 days. So we're doing an abysmal job as healthcare providers in caring for this very serious disease. So of that 1% that we're actually caring for, the way it works, we essentially diagnose them, we set up a treatment plan, and then we don't test them again for 3 years. So we're assuming that whatever treatment we set up on day one is working well. And what's scary is it's not. So what Sleep Vigil does is, more or less in a nutshell, it examines those patients on a nightly basis rather than once every 1,000 days. We're checking on them every day to see if whatever treatment we've employed for sleep apnea is effective. Again, the central theme through all that I'm spending this much time on is improving patient care, paramount to everything. Improving the physician's toolbox to care for those patients, and then making sure that they have the businesses behind them and use those technologies at their discretion for their best patient care. It's fun, but it's busy.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that hard-earned wisdom. I know it clearly required a lot of tenacity, both identifying a problem, coming up with a solution, and then just pushing it through. And I really love the way that you describe how these connections that you developed a decade before and just continued to nurture led to opportunities that ultimately allowed you to offer solutions for patients that can be life-changing.
So many people have been beneficial and helpful and mentored and protected. Yeah, that's been really the story of this past for me.
So let's get into the tech that's helping to evolve the ENT space. And let's talk some more about the prevalent devices that you're seeing gaining traction, including the things that you talked about, and what's in store for the future, and how that space might continue to evolve, and then what challenges and risks or potential dangers will need to be addressed along the way, particularly in our current healthcare environment.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm biased. You can tell I like my specialty a little bit, right? But it continues to enjoy huge outside investment, and just the best and the brightest R&D folks, business executives just continue to flock to ENT. It's very exciting. The technologies that I'm most enthusiastic about involve less invasive procedures. Okay, so I mentioned a moment ago, just even a quarter of a century ago, how invasive and arguably barbaric some of our head and neck and sinus procedures were. So I'm not talking about 100 years ago. I'm talking about in the 90s. And so I love this general trend towards minimally invasive yet maximally effective treatment. There's a general trend towards custom tailored treatment. I have some IP in that area, and many of my colleagues do as well. So what one treatment that may work for a subset of patients may not work for all patients. And so figuring out local drug delivery options based on that specific patient. There's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about biologics. Biologics as a general term are substances that are either like or actually from the human body used to help it heal itself. So in areas like allergy, in areas like chronic sinusitis, we're seeing a lot of success caring for patients with biologics. And then we're using artificial intelligence in a lot of different ways. In the back office, we're exploring an option in partnership with Microsoft at USENT, using AI to help us with charting. Part of being a doctor is the hours and hours that now we spend doing clerical work instead of patient care, but using AI actually in patient care, helping us evaluate radiographic exams, helping us evaluate critically what we're seeing endoscopically, so using scopes inside, and then even using AI to look more at population studies and to help guide us in treatment. So I'm very excited about that too. So it just continues to be significant innovation. And then, of course, the remote physiologic monitoring, the remote patient monitoring that we talked about at Sleep Vigil. I see that as, a mainstay, for example, of how my daughter will care for patients in the future. A hybrid of seeing them in our office, but monitoring them from afar.
So let's talk a little bit more about the AI issues. And this is an area where clearly there's a lot of promise, but I think people also have a bit of fear about AI, and maybe some of it is warranted. Other of it may just simply be fear of the unknown. Physicians may also be concerned about AI either replacing them, which clearly is not going to be the case, but perhaps taking over some of the parts of a physician's job that can be done in a rote manner and hopefully augmenting the work that we do. So let's talk more about that and how physicians and AI technology can work together in the future and how you see that partnership evolving over time.
Yeah, a lot of it's yet to be defined. And as I admit, I tend to be very optimistic, and I do think we will find a way to work hand in hand where that will really enhance patient care. But I do want to take a second, just because we have the platform, to talk about the abuse, in my opinion, of AI. So there's a lawsuit, one of the major third-party payers. I'm not going to use the name to be tactful because, again, the litigation is ongoing. There's not been a verdict yet. But one of the major payers in our country is accused of using AI to deny care. Very simply, the lawsuit is about, in Southern California, the statutes in California, as in probably all 50 states, are that a human being needs to interact with patient records at these insurance companies and actually evaluate whether or not what a physician has proposed as a treatment plan is viable. Now that's, again, an entire series of podcasts on its own, because sometimes these reviewers are actual physicians. Many times they're not. And you can make a good case that they're the ones actually practicing medicine by telling us yes or no, not us, right? We're just the technicians executing a plan that they approved. Not to take it too negative, but the next step in that is that this payer is accused of using AI, not even using the human beings, whether they're physicians or non-physicians, to review records and to deny claims. And the average time AI was used to review a claim was 1.2 seconds. Imagine if you were a patient sitting in my exam room and I spent 1.2 seconds deciding how to treat you. Would you feel like you got your value out of that interaction? These patients didn't either, because the physician wanted to care for them. The payer just used AI to refuse to pay for them. When we look, this is a different payer, but when we look at public insurance companies, just the bonuses that the executives make on an annual basis are 3 or 4 times what your local quarterback makes for your NFL team on an annual basis. Think about how third-party payers generate revenue. It's from premiums, right? At the end of the day, that's how they make money. So for them to have that much money left at the end of the year, the bonus means they're not paying for patient care. Now, I am not shirking the responsibility of providers to do thorough, competent record keeping, to dot their I's and cross their T's and try conservative options when they're able to, non-invasive options. Absolutely. That's our job as physicians. And I think physicians, by and large, are very honest and ethical. It becomes exceedingly frustrating, even more than all of the extra charting we have to do now, and how difficult it is to write a silly narcotics prescription. Well, you can't even write it. How silly it's become now to electronically prescribe a few days of pain medicine. The worst of it all is having other people decide for us how we can treat our patients, and then paying themselves thousands of times more than what physicians make to deny that care. So that's what worries me about AI, is they can just do that much more efficiently. It's a game. It's a game. In what I do sinus-wise, one major payer, again, I'm avoiding names here, one major payer, in my practice, probably 40% of my patients, will routinely, in our contract that we've negotiated, tell me certain procedures don't require prior authorization. So I do them in good faith. I spend thousands of dollars literally to buy the equipment to do that. Let's say a balloon sinuplasty with placement of 4 drug-eluting stents. That costs me thousands of dollars on my US ENT contract to even treat the patient, expecting reimbursement for that. What happens is they sit on that claim for 30 days, and then they send back a garbled fax or something that we're going to need to see your records and see if that procedure was indicated. So I've already done the procedure. I've already paid the bill to Stryker or whomever. And then they say, we're going to have to see if that was actually indicated. And they're going back through, and whether it's a human, whether it's an MD or a non-MD, or it's AI, and they'll find any reason to delay it or to ultimately not pay it. That's not good faith partnership. And that's not caring for your insured lives. And so that's where I worry about. Humans are bad enough, but when a computer can scour 3 years of medical records in 2 seconds and find one little loophole to deny care, where does that leave us? Where does that leave the patient? And that's what scares me. Now, the upside of AI, though, is that physicians are also human, and we are finite, and we miss things. And sometimes that's life or death. And I think a healthy partnership where we're using AI to minimize anything that we miss or even things yet to be imagined to improve how human hands and human eyes can actually evaluate a patient. Those are exciting and very positive to think about. So it's like any technology, right? It depends on whose hands it's in. Nuclear power, right, can be a very energy efficient way to power a city, or it can be the end of the planet, and it all depends on whose hands it's in.
That's a great analogy. And I share that frustration and the idea of these insurance companies or other entities undermining the trust and the connection that physicians develop with their patients. And I think that's one thing AI can't replace is that trust and connection and being able to get the story from the patient so that you can get to what's really troubling them physically and what the issues that might have led to that might be. And AI isn't going to replace that, but it is exciting to think about these opportunities to improve care. So, one interesting part of your work is being a physician for the Dallas Cowboys, which leads into a variety of other topics related to the use of technology for high performance health and wellness. So, I definitely want to hear more about that experience. And also, with all the advances in healthcare and new technologies, what can we expect in the future for connected devices, perhaps in the professional sports arena? And how might this converge with devices that will be available for everyday people? And do you expect that we might begin to see a widening gap for various technologies and who those technologies might be available for? Or do you see perhaps more opportunities for people to benefit from these devices and trials that we're seeing in more elite athletes?
Yeah, it's so fun to think about those things. And yeah, being a very small part of the Cowboys organization for many years now, they certainly have their critics, but I find the Jones family and the organization to be absolutely first class, and they care immensely about not just the 52 players on the sidelines, but the entire organization, which is quite large. And as such, they have invested a lot in the health and well-being of the entire company. One thing that I'm really excited about that I've become aware of is a newer technology to evaluate concussions. So obviously concussions have been on the forefront of people's minds, pun intended, for 10, 15, 20 years. And we see some of these tragic cases of football players especially, but soccer and other athletes with CTE later in life. And there's a newer technology, and I would simply use the brand name. I'm not affiliated, I'm not a consultant for them or anything like that, but it's called NeuroFlex. And it looks like virtual reality glasses, but it's a very sophisticated device that will allow us on the sidelines to truly objectively evaluate a patient after they've had a head injury and see if they show enough concussion symptoms of concern that we need to pull them out for further testing and observation. And this technology can follow them during their recovery to give us an idea when it's safe for them to return to competition. So as we think about American football, a sport that so many of us enjoy, and I've been a Cowboys fan since birth, basically. Even when I lived in Miami and they played the Dolphins in the Super Bowl, I already, for some reason, was a Cowboys fan. I loved the sport, but so many aspects of the sport, concussions, sleep apnea later in life, besides all the obvious orthopedic wear and tear. I think for that sport to continue to survive and thrive, we have to keep the athletes really healthy. And very much like the space program in the 60s and 70s led to all kinds of innovations, I think professional sports can do the same thing. So concussions are not just a problem amongst the 32 NFL teams, right? Concussions are a problem in sixth grade football and in ninth grade girls soccer. Soccer especially, there's no protection for the head. And to some extent, basketball. I was a baseball player before this, and I was hit in the head multiple times with fastballs and things. And so there's ways that we can make athletic competition safer with technologies. So I'm very excited about the degree of sophistication that we're bringing to professional sports. It's not my area of expertise, but of course, ways to make orthopedic injuries less common and less severe, the way we train, the way gear is designed going forward. There's so many fascinating things, and they all make their way back to the consumer and to amateur athletes. That's very fun. And again, it's probably its own podcast talking about that too.
Yeah, I find those ideas really fascinating and compelling. I compete in an equestrian sport, and there's always that risk of injury, even
We
with
think of
helmets.
Christopher Reeve, right? We think
Oh
of
gosh,
Christopher
yes.
Reeve, and
Yeah, that's a little beyond the level that, or beyond the sport that I compete in. But yeah, that's always a specter that I think especially parents whose children compete to have that in mind, and just anything to make sports, and especially sports where there's a lot of action and risk for injury, anything to make those safer benefits all of us. Yeah. So, in closing, do you have any final advice that you want to share, and tell us how listeners can stay connected to the innovations that are happening in the ENT space? And also, we're always interested in topical book recommendations and other types of content that you'd like to share. I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts or ideas there that you'd like our listeners to hear.
Sure. First of all, I welcome connection. And as I've said multiple times during this hour, so many people were benevolent to me and helped me with nothing to gain out of it, just out of the goodness of their heart. And I try to do the same. So I'm very active on social media, specifically LinkedIn. I think they'll share my link here in the show notes. And so please feel free to message me there. I try to post about the ENT space at least once or twice a week, and sometimes it's my stuff and the things I have going on. Many times it's not, things that I may be involved with or consulting on, just to show the innovation that continues to go on. And then as far as content, this podcast, excellent topics and information. There are other podcasts that I really enjoy and get and learn a lot from episodes. The Back Table family of podcasts that was first put together by an interventional radiologist here in Dallas, whose wife is an ENT surgeon at the medical school. And so she's developed, along with some of our other colleagues, Back Table ENT. And I think there are now several other Back Table podcasts, but they have thought leaders from academics, from community practice, from industry on there with topical discussions all the time. And I find those really fascinating and educational. So highly recommend there. Again, they don't sponsor me, nothing. They're just friends and doing a great job with their material. So that's what I would recommend.
Fantastic. It has been a pleasure talking with you and sharing this time and hearing about all the interesting arenas that you're involved with. And before we sign off, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, I'm just really appreciative of this chance to tell a little more of the story, and thank you so much for your gracious hosting. And it's good to chat with you again.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to this episode. TechLink Health is a healthcare advisory platform for consumers and organizations to stay informed with the latest insights while connecting with healthcare experts for telehealth, e-consults, and consulting services. For more details, visit www.techlink.health.